the past history of Ephraim reflects that the fact that the center of entertainment in Ephraim in 1880s to the 1930s centered around Anderson's Dock. That was the main area where everybody went to. That's where they had the yacht club had their races and swimming races, and it was a popular place. The Goodrich lines would come in there. From 1930 on to 1960, the center of the entertainment and industry of Ephraim was around Eagle Inn and Eagle Inn Piers and so forth. That's where all the people congregated. They came for the races. The yacht club was there, and there were sailboats and boating. There was a nice lawn to sit on, and it was much nicer than, of course, there was nothing at Anderson's Dock at that time. So it became the center, and I would say that after the 1970s, the center of the population thing and went down to where Wilson's is now, and South Shore Pier. So those are the three areas of popular during the time that I can remember. The yacht club was instrumental in helping it because they had their regatta the first weekend in August every year, and when they had the regatta, they even had fireworks in the evening, and this drew a lot of people. They hired professional log rollers to come in and do log rolling in between the Eagle Inn dock and the yacht club dock, and thousands of people would gather around there. People from Chicago would take the train up from Chicago to Manitowoc. The train would arrive at Manitowoc at about 1 or 1:30. They would meet the bus, which was Anderson Bus Line, and Anderson Bus Line would then drop the people off at the various hotels. So people would come up without cars, and so they really did not travel all around and have as much doing as it is today. The Anderson bus stopped at the Eagle Inn at 5:30 every night. You could expect it like clockwork. 5:30, the bus stopped, and people got off. They emptied the suitcases, and it went on, and to their home base up in Bailey's Harbor. So actually the best part of this was the fact that people were right there. Now, Eagle Inn, when you walked up the stairway and walked into the grand entranceway, was very, very palatial as far as a resort area was concerned. The restaurants were American planned restaurant, so that you had your food was served to you in bowls and dishes, and at each table they had a number of waitresses there. In fact, there was always, I remember quite a few, up to 12 or 15 waitresses that were handling the dining room. And being Eagle Inn, being a very large hotel, there was a lot of people to accommodate. We started going up there when I was 4 years old, and when I was 6 or 7, my folks started going up every weekend from Milwaukee, and Ivan would keep a room reserved for us. We'd have the same room every weekend, which happens to be number 16. I will always remember that. So it was very popular, and people were around there at all times. It also was the main area to house our one and only taxi that we had at the time, which was Sam Rogers, and Sam Rogers had a 1926 four-door Studebaker that he took people in. Most of the time he was sitting in the front talking with Ivan and my uncle, because that was their favorite place of sitting, was in front of that little shed. However, Sam's main job was to take people to the Catholic Church on Sunday, because there was no Catholic church in Ephraim, so many of the people without cars wanted to go to church. So Sam drove them to Sister Bay to go to church on Sunday. But most of the time his car was sitting out in the front. It wasn't very busy, but we had an Ephraim taxi. Now, my family did not stay at Eagle Inn that long. We stayed in there from about 1937 up to about 1942. And at that time, then they rented a place in Ephraim, and in 1944 they purchased one along the shore. But I do remember one year particular. I was 10 years old and my brother was 13. And my brother got a job for the summer working at Eagle Inn doing dishes. And so he spent the summer up here at Eagle Inn, and his dish partner was Bob Davis. And Bob was at that time was about 16 or 17, and the two of them worked on the dishes all summer very faithfully. They did a good job, breakfast, lunch, dinner. They were dirty dishes all the time. And but that's the time we came up quite extensively when he was here. And I know that's when he learned Bob taught him sort of how to sail. And we went on to rent the sailboats from Anderson's dock to go out sailing that year. And a year later we purchased our first Seagull, which was in 1944 for the Ephraim Yacht Club. Also at that time, Peninsula Players was just starting. And little Miss Fisher would bring those flyers in and put them on all the cars the weekend before the play. And sometimes she would stop at the yacht club and ask the kids would they help pass out, put things on the cars for her to run her little theater that she had, which was the end of a barn and seats outside, and was really a lot of fun to go to. But that was Ephraim at the time, and the Peninsula State Park was not that crowded, although there were a lot of the tourists, the tenters and campers that they had were quite predominant, but they would be able to come up for the whole summer at that time. They weren't restricted. So there were a lot of campers that came up on Memorial Day and went home on Labor Day. And the day after Labor Day in Ephraim, you could shoot a cannon down the middle of the street and you wouldn't hit anything because there was nothing around. Everybody left. However, when you remember Ephraim at that time, it was a lot different because there were no street lights. There were no cars, hardly any cars whatsoever. People walked everywhere, walked on the streets. The streets, everybody mentioned that the streets rolled up at 10 o'clock at night. It was just perfectly empty. The village hall held movies every Tuesday and Thursday night. And that would be the main entertainment on Tuesday and Thursday night. Of most of the villagers of Ephraim and the resort people would go to the movies at the village on Tuesday or Thursday night, and then a little stop at Wilson's afterwards. So it was really quite nice, but you walked wherever you went at that time. You didn't drive, and there was no parking problems whatsoever. So it was a different era, but it was a lot nicer, and things do change, and this Ephraim has changed quite a bit from that time.
I came to Ephraim when I was a little girl with my mom and dad. And we always stayed at Eagle Inn, the same cottage, which is now up near Summer Kitchen. And I remember there was a cottage next to us, and they were from St. Louis. And then the Nelsons were there, and Don Nelson and my brother were buddies. And of course I was quite a bit younger. We always came up here for my dad's 2-week vacation, so the war was over, what, in 44, 45, so I was 4 or 5 years old.
Wow.
At that time. So, and we continued to come up for the 2 weeks every year. It must have been the same time because we seemed to know the same people, which was very nice for my family. And then we started to rent some cottages for the season. And then from there, we ended up buying one. So, and then with my family, then I got married, and my husband, Dick, enjoyed it up here. And that's pretty much it. Now my children love it, and my grandchildren love it.
Sure.
So hopefully it's going to be passed down for many years. But it was fun, and it was a different way of life because the cottages were comfortable, nothing fancy, but very comfortable. And the food was all homemade, so it was delicious. Well, it's interesting how things change. Like, for instance, Gerhard Miller, I remember that he had a clothing store where the red barns are.
Oh.
And then there was a little cheese shop in there between, well, it was a Mexican door, I think, at the time, and another one. It was kind of in between. And it was owned by a Bradley. I don't know their first names, but so that was how things have changed over the years.
Sure.
And let's see what else is, oh, and then with Maury Larson's, I used to take my little rowboat down there and take the gas can, and Maury would help me with that and fill me up with gas and put it back in my boat for me, and off I'd go. I thought I was pretty swift to be able to run a little motorboat. Remember Nancy, I think her last name was Panther or something like that, her grocery store, which was then another filling station, which is now Chef's Hat.
Sure.
On that corner.
Wow.
And I remember going into the post office at the Village Hall.
Sure.
With Bert Thorpe and Bill Witterpool. And all the telephone booths were to the left as you're facing the Village Hall, on the left before you went up the stairs. And that's where people made their phone calls.
Sure.
And in any of the cabins that we rented, there was not a phone. And my father would have to go down there and make any business calls. No cell phones or anything like that. And then there was a wonderful bakery, Laps Bakery, the north part of Ephraim. That's changed and had been different people in there. And you had Bill Crum, Alterations, and they sold clothes. So it was just a great community, and Ephraim is very special because it's not like any of the other villages up here. And so many people come to Ephraim to look at the sunset. It's so wonderful. It's something that we've been given to us and we should enjoy and appreciate. I grew up with Linda Mayhew, Carrie, and after work, go over there and we get together, and they had a smorgasbord. I'm not sure exactly when it was, Tuesday or Thursday or whatever, and they made all homemade goods, and we would have the leftovers, particularly the pies. They were wonderful.
Sure.
And Mally made all the uniforms for the girls, taught them all how to make things and how to set the table up. It was awesome. Linda's dad would sit down and talk to everybody. So it was like a family. Everybody that came there was like a family. You know, wonderful memories, wonderful memories. And then I worked for Doris Miller. My mom was there all the time, and I was kind of like a gopher. And finally Doris said, "Would you like a job here?" And I said, "Well, sure, I'd take a job." But then again, they were open like from 10 until 12, and then they would break for lunch, and then they would be open like 1 to 5, and then they'd have like a 2-hour, I guess, for dinner, and then 7 to 9 it would be open. She was a wonderful individual who made silver jewelry, and she cut it out, cut every little piece to make the jewelry out of a thin piece of sterling. She'd take her little saw and saw it, and her hands were always dark from working with the silver. And people would come and just watch her.
Sure.
She was an interesting lady, a wonderful person. And then she put her little stamp on the back of them,
Mm-hmm.
and people would come in, and if they had a grandchild that had just been born, they ordered what they called an ID bracelet for the grandchild. Now, whether that grandchild ever used it or wore it, I have no idea, but it was a wonderful thought. At that time, they had a scenic boat that Ronnie Hubbard had, because he was running the, not the yacht club, but the marina down there. And his son and Joe Blahnik from Fish Creek would take it out after, we'd all pile on the boat. And it'd be a very quiet night, and we'd go out to the point over there thinking nobody would hear us, right? Mm-hmm. And Joe Blahnik played the trumpet. And that was the ukulele days. And then, I'd come home and my parents would say, "Did you have a good time?" And I said, "Well, sure." They said we heard almost the whole conversation because it was such a quiet night oftentimes.
Sure.
There wasn't much you could get into trouble with
Yeah.
at the time.
My father had a big boat, and he kept it in Fish Creek. My mother didn't like being on the boat, so we stayed at the old Ida Anderson cottages. And then we never stayed in Ephraim, and we stayed in Sister Bay, and that's how we would walk down from the Steve cottage, and that's how I had my first black cow at Hoodsby's, because it was written on the window. And my mother and dad would have cherry pie and coffee, and my brother and I would have black cows. And I always thought that was I'd never heard of a black cow. And yet my dad owned a dairy. We were privy to, I guess we called them root beer floats or something different than that. But it remained black cow after that. Ted Cornell's owned the Riding Academy on the corner of A and Highway 42. A friend of mine was there, and we had ridden horses together in Manitowoc at the Manitowoc Riding Academy. So my parents drove up, and I stayed at Cornell's in one of the little cottages overnight with her, and I said, "Oh, this would be the place," And I was 15, and I went home, and I already had 2 horses of my own, and I went home. 2 days later, I received a phone call from Cynthia saying, "I am so ill, Gigi, I'm sorry, that I have to go back to Manitowoc, and I don't think I'm going to be coming back for the rest of the season. Would you consider coming up with bring your horses?" And I said, "This is from you, Cynthia? It should be from Ted Cornell's." And she said, "Ted has asked me to do this." And I said, "We'll come up. My parents will bring me up, but we're going to have to talk a little bit before I do." My parents thought it was a very good idea. Within 4 days or 5 days, I was at Cornell's Riding Academy with my 2 horses, Easter Echo and Ladette. And it was a wonderful experience. I enjoyed every minute. I did 3 more years of it. And in my second year I had a roommate from Iowa who was a school teacher. June was dating my husband-to-be. And one afternoon, after we had finished everything in the horse barn, she went into the big house, took a shower. I came into the living. She said, "Oh, Gigi, Wayne is out there. Will you tell him I'm really running late?" And I saw this convertible, top down man, good looking, sitting in it, and I thought, oh wow, this is who she's dating. And at Cornelius Farm, they had one of these chain fences with a horse head here to keep the area of their home and the buildings where the help stayed. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to jump over that chain, and then I still had my riding boots on. My heel caught and down I went. And he got out of the car and picked me up, and he said, "Wow." And that's about all I remember of the car. And I said, "Oh, I'm so embarrassed. June will be out right away." And I went into our cab and I thought, oh, nice. You know, really nice, Gigi. So anyway, then June had to go back to Grundy Center, Iowa, because their school system started early, and I was still in high school, so I stayed. And Wayne asked me, I think I was pushing a big barrel out of the barn, as in wheelbarrow, and he stopped, and his father was with him, and then he said, would you like to go to the outdoor things? And I said, well, yeah, but I said, right now I'm kind of busy. And at that time his father said to him, oh, that's the girl for you. Look at the pile on her wheelbarrow. The other ones don't have theirs piled that full. Well, anyway, I went out with him and I dated him 3 years, and we were engaged, and then we were married in 1956. And I wanted college, I wanted the world, of course, don't we all? But our marriage was a good marriage. It, however, did end 23 years later. But I had 3 wonderful children, and wonderful mother-in-law and father-in-law. My father-in-law was the first fire chief in Ephraim, Paschke. My mother-in-law was the first woman chieftain and the 10th chieftain. And we often talked about fire chief, Fuhrerball. We weren't sure if we should call her Fuhrerball chief, Fuhrerball chiefess, so we just called her Hilda. We also set off the fireworks for many, many years at the Ephraim beach, public beach, because of the fact that we're dynamiters.
Sure.
And Wayne would we owned a farm, it had a magazine on it, and he would go and pick up the fireworks for the village and then store them. And we never, I think one of the times one of my children said, we can't do anything on the 4th of July. We have to be down at the beach. We have to bend hangers, coat hangers, because that's how you cleared out the mortars. And the mortars had to be in the sand. He brought his shovel on. All 3 of my kids helped set off fireworks. Not set them off to speak, but prep work. And we couldn't go to parade, especially there was work that had to be done. We had to rope it off, and that's where the fireworks were always set off. And we hoped to have the windows from the right direction, because very closely there were the cottages, the Jensen cottages, Larson cottages, Hotel Ephraim, all of that area. Never had a bad incident.
Good.
But I remember bending hangers to fit into those mortars, and Wayne would ask his friends and his employees to help out too. But that when that ended, it was kind of nice. Then
Okay.
we could sit, but my son had never liked fireworks after that. In 1950, the Skyway Outdoor Theater opened up, okay? Well, think of where Cornell's Writing Academy is and think of where that outdoor movie theater was. I'd take my own horse. Sometimes Ted would say, "Oh, he was very German. Oh, June, I suppose you want to take one of my horses over there." And she'd say, "Uncle Ted," we always had to call him Uncle Ted. Why, I don't know. But we did, and so she got to take her horse, and we watched the theater production movie. I can't even tell you what I saw back then. Sitting on our horses.
Wow.
I never wanted to take my horse, who was a three-gated American show horse, over if I knew it was a Western or anything that they would have shooting, because I didn't want to fall off that horse in the backyard. I'm not doing it properly by being there anyway. But whenever we would, they had their marquee, and we would ride over and see what was playing. There wasn't the Pulse or anything like that back then. There was the Advocate, but we never took the horses when there was anything Western, because we knew it was trouble. And it was kind of funny because years went by and I was no longer taking my horse over there. Wayne had a class reunion, and I remember where it was. It was Clayton's in Ellison Bay, and we were married then. And went to the class reunion, and I see this guy looking at me, and he came over, and he said, "You look so familiar." And then Wayne introduced me to Orville Fakes that owned it, and his wife, and I did not know his wife, and he said, "Do you ever ride horses?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You were one of the two young girls that were sitting way in the back, were you?" He said, "Because I kind of think I remember you." And I said, "Oh gosh." I said, "Yes."
Wow.
And it turned out that I did say, and I think that I probably should, I said, "Wayne, I think you better pay Orville, I owe a little back admissions." On Labor Day of the third year that I had worked, that would be probably 1952, I took my show horse and I rode down to Wilson's to get the special Wilson's basket, which was a hamburger, french fries, and coleslaw. And I never met a car. It was like 2 in the afternoon on Labor Day. They were closed on Labor Day. Everything closed back in the early 50s on Labor Day. Nothing was open beyond. Everybody did. And Wilson's might have been open maybe a day or two, but not like today. And that was the way it was. There was no fourth, or would have been the third season, fall season really to speak of back then. And that was a rude awakening, because I was looking forward to that hamburger basket.